Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today is 29th of May 2024. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So just a reminder for you guys that there will be no refuels on tomorrow or Friday. So the next 2 days I will be away and I'll be back on Monday, of course, with the next refuel there. So just wanted to give you guys a quick reminder on that. But without further ado there, I want to go into the news from the last 24 hours. And I have a lot to say about one particular item case here, because I think that there's been a lot of questions around the SEC, around regulations, around kind of what the space is going to look like going forward, given that we had the ETH ETFs being approved. And I know I've already said a lot about it over the past couple of episodes, but I think that there's more to say here. And the reason why I'm talking about it today is because, as you can see here, Paul Grewal, Coinbase's chief legal officer, tweeted out today that Judge Shelby ordered the SEC to pay attorneys fees of over $1 million and receivership fees of about $750,000 after finding that the commission engaged in bad faith conduct in obtaining and defending the TRO and imposed a sanction against the commission of all attorney fees and costs arising from the improvidently entered ex parte relief. Now, in simple terms here, you guys will remember that debt box case that the judge ruled against the SEC for, because essentially the SEC basically broke the law, I believe, in that case and lied about what they were doing in that case. And now they've been ordered to cover the relevant legal fees here. Now, of course, the SEC itself is a government entity. So where does that money come from? It comes from US taxpayers, which is just insane to me, considering that they, did wrong here, but there's really no, blowback on them. They're not out of pocket the money themselves. They used two of the SEC staff as kind of scapegoats here. You'll remember I covered this a few weeks ago, where these SEC staff were basically forced to resign as kind of sacrificial lambs over this case. But the reason why I think that this is important is for a number of different reasons. One, I think this case was in like a long list of cases and a long list of losses that the SEC had that definitely changed their tune, or at least forced their hand in approving the ETH ETFs, and also forced the Democrats' hand in being more friendly towards crypto, given that the SEC had lost so many high-profile crypto cases and had also kind of lost them in such a extreme way, right? To the point where the judge basically said that the SEC broke the law in the debt box case, and that in any normal circumstances, if these weren't SEC lawyers, the lawyers would have been disbarred, which is obviously one of the worst things, if not the worst things that can happen to you as a lawyer, right? Where essentially if you get disbarred, from my understanding, you can't practice law anymore for a period of time or indefinitely, depending on kind of what happens there. But when you look at it from that perspective, it, to me, is no surprise that the SEC and the Democrats have softened their stance on crypto generally here. That's not to say that won't change going forward. That's not to say that all of them are going to be in the same camp. As I explained the other day, the big ones like Elizabeth Warren, Gary Gensler, Brad Sherman, Maxine Waters, they're all still very anti-crypto. But I think that they, took a calculated bet on being anti-crypto, and they were really bad at math, because essentially that completely backfired on them. And now there is a very big pro-crypto kind of army, I guess, to counter what Warren's anti-crypto army that is really well-funded, that is basically getting into politics, lobbying the right politicians, getting them on side, and creating this pro-crypto army within Congress that is really beneficial for all of the crypto ecosystem here. Now, of course, this opens up questions around a bunch of different things, and one of those questions is something that someone in the Daily Gwei Discord channel wanted me to cover, was around the tokens themselves within crypto. Like, are these tokens going to get proper regulatory clarity? Does that mean that these tokens can start acting more like a, security, where it pays a dividend, right? Where it essentially, for example, the Uni token would be able to have a fee switch turned on where it could actually share in the profits generated by the Uniswap protocol, but not be subject to any kind of, regulatory scrutiny or regulatory uncertainty. And this is a really big discussion, because when you talk about something like Uniswap, as I've discussed before, there are multiple different kind of, arms of Uniswap, right? There's the Uniswap protocol, the set of smart contracts that exist on Ethereum, completely decentralized, immutable. They're there, and they're there to stay forever, or until the Ethereum network goes offline, right? Whenever that is, could be hundreds of years, could be thousands of years, or could happen tomorrow for whatever reason, right? That's kind of how long Uniswap will last, for as long as Ethereum lasts. Now, of course, between that, there is different sets of contracts. There's V1, V2, V3, and coming V4, which I think is going to go live over the next few months there, and any future versions. And they have differences between them. But if we're talking about the totally immutable, nothing can ever be changed, that would be Uniswap V2. V3 has levers to change certain things, like the fee switch, for example. But really, And other than that, it's completely immutable. You can't kind of censor tokens on the smart contract level of Uniswap. You can't remove, liquidity pools, so on and so forth. But then you have the more centralized side of Uniswap, which is the Uniswap Labs team and things like the Uniswap Foundation. And the Uniswap Labs team runs the front end for Uniswap, or at least one of the front ends, the most popular front end for Uniswap, the one that everyone kind of goes to and trusts if they're newer to the ecosystem as well. And Uniswap also has a wallet that they have out there. So they operate a front door into the Uniswap protocol. Now, of course, because of that, they essentially are a target for the SEC and for other regulators out there. So I think that even if the tokens themselves are deemed to not be securities or are deemed to be, fined by regulation standards, the problem becomes that the SEC and other regulatory bodies can still go after the teams building the products, even if the products are decentralized and immutable, and the teams that originally issued that token too. Because a lot of these tokens get issued out of foundations to basically separate the token issuance from the team building the software itself. But at the end of the day, like, the small teams can do this, but then if they get, I guess, pursued by the SEC, they can't really afford to defend themselves. Uniswap can afford to defend itself because they have a lot of money, but the smaller teams, the upstarts, the true startups within the crypto ecosystem, if they're in the US and if they get targeted by the SEC for, I guess, like, serving US users or being based in the US, then a lot of the times they can't actually afford to defend themselves. And a lot of the times they'll actually just pay whatever penalty needs to be paid and shut down their project, which is obviously very bad for innovation. It's obviously very bad for this ecosystem, but that is kind of where we're at right now. And unfortunately, it's not just limited to teams that are in the US. It's also for teams that exist outside of the US, but accidentally serve US users, because as far as the US is concerned, they are allowed to reach into wherever they want in the world if you are interacting with the US in any way. If you're serving US customers in any way, if you're interacting with the US kind of system in any way, you are a target for them. And the US is obviously a big monolith and gets what it wants a lot of the time. So that is the kind of fear that they strike into people, into builders, and that is not the way forward. So hopefully we get better clarity around that for that purpose, because it's not just the tokens themselves, it's also the teams. Because if the teams don't feel comfortable building these things for regulatory reasons, then they're not going to do it, right? And I know that there's been teams before that want to build certain things, lots of teams that want to build certain things, but they just don't do it. I mean, the Uni fee switch is probably the perfect example, where it hasn't been turned on for so long because they were worried about the regulatory side of things. But it seems now, it looks like it's actually going to end up getting turned on here, which is a pretty big step. And then that will allow or act as a shield for the rest of these DeFi protocols to start integrating stuff like that and just go for it, right? Like, the SEC is going to sue you anyway, whether you do the right thing or not. I mean, they went after Uniswap, even though Uniswap has been one of the most careful teams in crypto, right? So if the SEC and the regulators are going to come after you anyway, you may as well just do it, because at the end of the day, they're going to go after you if you're doing good or bad. So you may as well just do and build what you want to build without, scamming or committing fraud or anything like that. But just building things that the regulators may deem as something that they don't want to see and something that they think is bad. But at the end of the day, it's not. It's just that it doesn't fit into their neat little box that they have for the existing financial system, especially there. But anyway, moving on from that one onto some updates around layer 2. So I think the rest of this episode is actually going to be about layer 2s. And I think it's probably something that I need to talk about a lot going forward, because there is a lot of evolution happening with the L2 space right now. And I think that there are too many L2s at this point. And what I mean by that is that there's too many independent L2 ecosystems. And I'm going to cover that at the end of the episode. But firstly, on the L2 topic, I wanted to cover that ENS actually made an announcement today. They're introducing ENS v2, which they're calling the next generation of ENS. So essentially, the biggest part of ENS v2 is that they are moving ENS to a layer 2 network. Now, in their design document here, they basically don't specify what this is going to look like yet, but they float the idea of either deploying ENS to a existing public L2 or a dedicated chain. So they're going to either have an ENS chain, an ENS L2, or they're going to have basically their ENS deployed to an existing L2, whether it be Base or Arbitrum 1 or one of the bigger L2s out there. So that makes total sense there, I think, from that perspective. But on that note as well, it kind of begs the question of, like, should they do a dedicated L2 versus deploying a public one? And what does that look like from an end user perspective? Because if you want to manage your, I guess, like, ENS name today, you do it pretty much all at L1. That is the shelling point. That is the place that everyone knows to go. But if they move a part of it or a big part of it to L2, and to one of the L2s, they're essentially picking a winner here as well. They're basically saying that, okay, well, if you want to interact with ENS, you either do it at L1 or you do it on Arbitrum, for example, right? And that, I think, is, I guess, eroding some of the credible neutrality and some of the decentralization properties of ENS. So it might be better for them to do their own dedicated chain so they're not picking winners here. And really that chain would just be a way to manage ENS names without having the, the high gas cost and without kind of pricing people out from that perspective there, which I personally think could be the better way forward here. But we're going to have to see what the rest of the ecosystem thinks and what the, I guess, like ENS contributors think as well, but that would make the most sense to me because I'm not really a fan of big projects picking winners within the L2 space because it basically means that you not only have, I mean, I wouldn't say you fragment the user base, but what you have is not only a kind of like eroding of credible neutrality of that project, but you also have something where these projects will start competing for ENS. So for example, Arbitrum, Optimism, the other L2s out there, Polygon, so on and so forth, they'll use their treasuries to bid for ENS to come there. And this has already happened with other projects, right? And this is why it doesn't actually, isn't actually a very good idea, is because essentially what you have is a lot of nastiness around that, a lot of toxicity around that. You have these projects getting all this money just to pick a certain chain to deploy to, whereas if they want it to remain as credibly neutral as possible, I think spinning up their own chain that can be integrated with these other ones would probably be the better way forward, especially for something like ENS, because really, at the end of the day, if you're talking about like the ENS registry system itself, that is not something that people will, I guess, interact with very often. Like, for example, I have Sassel.eth, and I haven't interacted with it in a long time. I've actually set Sassel.eth's expiry to, I think, like 50 years from now. So I renewed it for like 50 years on chain there. Now, I don't have any reason to go to the ENS kind of site at this point to change anything about Sassel.eth. Maybe if I wanted to send that ENS name to a new address instead of the existing one that it's tied to, or kind of change the registry information there, or set like some other information in there, I would do that. But really, it is not something that I'm going to every day, every week, every month. It may be something that I look at once a year. So from that perspective, I think it makes total sense for this stuff to be deployed to maybe a dedicated L2 that just really handles all the ENS related stuff, because people aren't going to have to interact with it that often to manage their ENS names there. But we're going to have to see how that all shakes out. There is this paper here which you can go check out, this design doc. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But I don't think they've decided on what they're doing just yet, whether it's going to be a dedicated chain or they're going to migrate ENS to an existing L2 out there. All right, so Base has increased its execution side scalability over, I guess, the last couple of days. So Jesse Polak here said that Base's gas target has increased to 6.25 megagas per second, which is an overall capacity increase of 25%. And fees, of course, are down significantly again because of this. This is them working their way to 1 gigagas per second, of course. But you can see here on this really great chart that I've shown before what this actually looks like. You can see the blue line is the gas limit increase, that 25% increase there. The yellow line is the base fee. As you can see, it did start going down obviously before the increase, but has since gone down even more dramatically since the increase was put in place. And then the purple line here is the amount of space that's being used, which is again creeping up because of the, I guess, concept of induced demand, which definitely plays out in a really big way on the L2s here. Now, of course, blobs are still not at capacity again or anything like that, which means that the bottleneck is still the execution side for these L2s. So it's great to see that they're still working on that, because I mean, at the end of the day, like, we could increase blobs by, I guess, like 5x from here, and it wouldn't make a difference to the rollups because blobs aren't at capacity. Whereas the execution side of these rollups, them increasing the execution side makes an absolutely massive difference because of the fact that that thing gets quickly filled up due to induced demand and due to the fact that these things are being used more than ever. I mean, I think I showed the other day on the Refuel the Grow the Pie website. I'll bring it up again for you guys here. So essentially you can see here that the layer 2 user base is just up and up. I know there was a bit of an outlier here, as you can see on the chart, but really it's still at all-time highs. And you can see on the different sections on Grow the Pie, the throughput, all the other kind of metrics that they have on here are still definitely trending in the right direction, which is up and to the right, which is what we love to see there. But then there's also the gasfees.io website, which I've showed before, but I'll show it again here, which basically shows you what the costs of transactions are like on these different rollups right now. So on Base, a Uniswap trade is still only 2 cents. That is very, very cheap, guys. A USDC transfer is half a cent here, and then you have an ETH transfer, which is even cheaper than that. And you can see it's comparable across other L2s. Arbitrum is even cheaper than Base right now at around 1.2 cents for a Uniswap trade. OP Mainnet, a bit more expensive, same with ZK Sync and Scroll and Linnea as well. So, and you can see on Ethereum L1, it's $7.30 for a Uniswap trade. So obviously substantially more expensive there. Now, of course, guys might have noticed as well over the last few days, gas fees on L1 have started trending up again. Now, what is the, I guess, like amazing thing about this is that I think gas went to like 40 Gwei, but L2 fees remain the same because, as you guys know, the blob market of on Ethereum L1 is the blob fee market is completely separate to the normal L1 fee market. So the normal L1 fee market can literally go to hundreds of Gwei or thousands of Gwei, and that would have no a material effect on the blob gas fees, the blob base fee. Now, of course, you can draw some kind of, I guess, looser correlations where essentially if the gas fees on L1 were going and consistently staying at like 100 plus Gwei, then that would mean that the market was very, very hot, which means that the L2s are probably hot. So we may hit the blob capacity, and then blob fees will start going up from there. But these markets are independent of each other, and that's the most beautiful thing, because it means that just because L1 fees go up doesn't mean the L2 fees have to go up on the data side here, and it means that the L2s have a lot more, I guess, like freedom and flexibility here to essentially keep scaling up on their side of things while also not having to worry about the blob side of things. Now, of course, I've also mentioned that in the coming, I guess, like year or so, there are massive upgrades coming to blobs with PeerDAS and potentially increasing the size and count of blobs that will just increase the capacity by maybe another order of magnitude there, not to mention all the other things that are coming down the pipeline as well. So really, I think I mentioned this before I went on my break, that we're in the Ethereum kind of like scalability golden age here, where for years to come, these L2s are just going to keep getting more scalable and scalable, not only through their own work as on the execution side of things, but also on the data side of things, because we're going to reach capacity eventually, guys. It's not going to be, at zero, basically zero Gwei forever. It's going to go up, not because of inscriptions, but because there's just going to be more and more rollups coming online that use this stuff there, which I'll talk about in a sec. I actually have a tweet from Hill Dobby lined up that I wanted to speak about there. But yeah, the final thing on the L2 front before I talk about the Hill Dobby's tweet here was Polygon announced today something called a pessimistic proof, which is a novel zero-knowledge proof that is flexible enough to support both ZK and non-ZK chains, and they explain exactly what this is in this thread here. Guys, the most magical thing about the L2 ecosystem, as I've always said, is not the scalability of it, it's the experimentation. And not just the experimentation on the app level, but on the infrastructure level as well, because we would never have gotten something like a pessimistic proof or a workable zero-knowledge proof or different types of zero-knowledge proofs if it wasn't for the fact that we kind of went all in on the L2 ecosystem here, and it was able to get funded, because there's tens of billions of dollars that have gone into these L2s, and all of that money is being used on this research that is going to pay massive dividends over the years to come in terms of not just scalability, but increased experimentation for builders on these L2 ecosystems. So a huge kudos to Polygon for obviously pushing the I guess like industry forward here with this, but they're not the only team doing it. There's pretty much every L2 team is doing this in their own way. Some of them are focused on ZK stuff, some of them are focused on optimistic stuff. I've always said, and I've said this for a long while now, and I actually saw people talking about this on Twitter today, but you guys know I've said this years ago. I think at this point, it would have to have been in 2021 at least. I was saying this, where people were kind of asking, is ZK tech going to obsolete optimistic tech? And does that mean that any ZK VMs are going to obsolete Optimism or Arbitrum? And at the time, I said this, and I say the same thing now, no, because what matters most is the ecosystem built around these things, not the underlying technology that they use. So in the end, if ZK proofs prove to be, and it looks like they are going to be, a much better technology solution than optimistic rollups, all these L2s have to do, all these optimistic rollup L2s have to do, is change their proofing architecture from fraud proofs to ZK proofs and to validity proofs technically, and then that's it. They're there, and end users wouldn't even feel the difference. Maybe the fees would be a little bit volatile for a little while, but other than that, end users probably wouldn't feel anything different. But the underlying tech would be a lot different. The underlying security assumptions would be a lot stronger, and essentially we would be in that world where Arbitrum and Optimism would keep their entire ecosystems while becoming ZK rollups. And I've said that, as I said, since 2021. You can probably go back and find a video of me saying that. I've written about it when I was doing the Daily Gwei newsletter. It is not something new, but it's funny to see people finally talking about it on Twitter like it's something that is a profound insight. It's like, no guys, like we've known this for a while, but hey, glad that you're on board now with this there. But anyway, you can go check out Polygon's announcement for yourself. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so on to the topic that I wanted to talk about when I announced at the start of the episode with regards to the fact that there are too many L2s, guys. I love L2s, but there are so many now. As you can see from Hill Dobby's tweet, there are 24 L2s and inscriptions posting Ethereum blobs, and he's showing the first 7 in his screenshot here. Now, this is from his dashboard where I can actually see, where is it? The ETH2 staking, the blobs dashboard I should bring up. Hill Dobby's got many good dashboards here, but this is the blobs dashboard, which you guys know about. I've shown this a bunch of times before, but essentially if you look at the L2s posting blobs, so if we look at, if we sort it by the L2s posting the most amount of blobs to the least amount of blobs, if we look at the distinct L2s, you have, because a base falls into the optimism ecosystem, right? So if you look at just the distinct separate ones, you have base and OP mainnet, which are 1, Arbitrum is 2, you have Scroll, which is 3, Linnea 4, ZK Sync 5, Starknet 6, Zora and Mode are part of the Optimism ecosystem. So is Paradox, I believe. And then Tycho, which is 7 on its own. I'm just looking for things that aren't part of other ecosystems here. So really there's like I guess, maybe 7 or 8 blob posting L2s right now, rather than the 24 that Hill Dobby said in terms of like distinct L2s. So there are 24 L2s, but there are only, I guess, like 7 distinct ones that are in their own ecosystems here. They're kind of their own thing here. So from that perspective, I think that is probably getting on the too much side, because as I've said before, I feel like, or at least my prediction is that there's only going to be a small handful of these superchain ecosystems that consist of thousands of L2s within them. So you'll have like the Optimism superchain, the Arbitrum superchain. They call it different things, but just for I guess like ease of terminology here, I'm going to call them all superchains. You have maybe the Polygon superchain, and then maybe you have a few others like the ZK Sync superchain and a few others out there that really exist as a niche, as their own thing, doing their own thing. Like, for example, Tycho is doing its own thing with based rollups, right? But then what does that look like in the long term, as I discussed yesterday? Does every rollup become a based rollup? So there's a lot of open questions right now, but I think that two things are true here. First thing is that there's not going to be 1,000 superchains, definitely not. And second thing is that most of the activity, 80% of the activity is going to be concentrated in 5 or less superchains, I believe. And I think that we're already seeing that play out, but I think it's going to get even more concentrated than that. And then I guess like the third thing, which is related to those two things, is what's the interoperability going to look like? What's the, I guess, like cross L2 communication going to look like? Is it going to go through the L1, through base sequencing? Is it going to be done via bridges? Is it going to be done via something like the AG layer from Polygon, or whatever else it is? I think there's going to be a mixture there. But then what does that look like in 10 years time? Because I'm always looking very, very far out, 5-10 years at least, when it comes to these things. And I really try to imagine what it's going to look like. And to imagine that far out, what you have to do is you have to basically follow the incentives, and you have to follow the incentives, both monetary and the user onboarding incentives too. And really, at the end of the day, like the monetary incentives are quite clear, right? Everyone wants to make the most amount of money they can for their ecosystem, of course, and that's fine, and that leads us to a certain conclusion. But then you have the user experience side of things, which is essentially like, how do you make this as easy as possible to onboard users and get them through that sales funnel? Because essentially what it always is a sales funnel, right? You have like at the top of the funnel where all of your potential new users exist, which for crypto obviously is the billions of people that exist on the planet. And then as they go down that funnel, you lose users for whatever reason, right? So essentially you want to capture as many of them as possible and lose the least amount, and that's going to be one of the main focuses too. So I think to get there, both on the monetary side and the user experience side in 5 to 10 years, the end game is ZK. I know that's a meme, but it is. ZK is the end game here, so everything's going to be ZK. You're going to have interoperability between all these protocols via probably base sequencing and shared sequencing in some parts, but I feel like it's going to be it's kind of hard to reason about this, because I feel like the Ethereum L1 is the best shared sequencer we probably will be able to come up with, because as I mentioned yesterday, it is a really strong selling point for all of the L2s out there and just the wider Ethereum ecosystem. So I feel like that might be the end game as well. So ZK as the end game, Ethereum L1 validators and block builders as the kind of sequencing layer there for the L2s. And then you have near perfect interoperability and communication between all of these different layers, which feeds into the user experience side of things, which is what I just talked about with regards to making sure that you can onboard the most amount of users. And then the ultimate question becomes, okay, well then where does the value flow? Like, who is the ultimate winner here? Is it Arbitrum? Is it Optimism? Is it Polygon? Is it ZK Sync? Is it Starknet? Is it whoever else? Or is it Ethereum? And I'm like, okay, well, I can tell that obviously Ethereum is going to be like the ultimate winner here, Ethereum ecosystem in general. ETH as an asset is going to be the ultimate winner as well because of the fact that it's used everywhere and and it's a Schelling point for the entire ecosystem. But then people will ask, which of these L2 tokens are going to be the most valuable? What kind of infrastructure players are going to be the most valuable here? What's it going to look like for L1 validators? Are they going to get a cut of this? And so on and so forth. So there is a lot of open questions. As I said, you've got to follow the incentives, but the incentives are varied. Let's just call it like that. The incentives are varied because of the fact that every project is in it for themselves, as they should be, but there is some kind of cooperation that needs to happen between them in order to grow the pie altogether, which I think that whether they want to or not, these ecosystems are going to be forced into doing that, which then ultimately begs the question of, okay, well, what's the ultimate Schelling point? And that's going to be the Ethereum L1, I think, in my mind anyway. But yeah, anyway, enough rambling about that. You can go check out all of that stuff. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But I think that's going to be it for today's episode, guys. I know it's a bit shorter than usual, but yeah, I think that's it for today. So yeah, thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all on Monday. Thanks, everyone.